In the matter of the people of the state of California versus Orenthal James Simpson, case number BA096.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you.
And we're back.
Ask what you can do
And we
for your
are
country.
moving over to the true crime side of... It's not even true crime. My topic today is going to be weird, Taylor. I think you're going to have a lot of opinions
like
about
it.
the topic today. Because I went a little
Excited.
bit out of my element, and I think I did an okay job, but I don't know. So let me start by saying, welcome to Doomed to Fail, the podcast about relationships or things that were doomed to fail. And today we're covering, I guess, kind of a historical thing / like almost true crime, more so public intrigue. I don't know how to really
I love it.
totally
Let's get.
describe it.
I like that we're getting weird with it. That's what I like about us is we're getting weird.
We're getting a little
Do
bit
whatever
weird.
you
This one's going to be a little bit weird. Okay, so
Great.
are you ready?
I'm ready. I'm excited.
Okay. So today's story is going to have 3 acts.
Ooh.
Act 1 will be the topic we're covering itself. Act 2 will be the public backlash to the thing that we're covering. And Act 3 will be
Okay.
the doomed to fail part of the story.
Nice.
Interesting, right?
Okay.
I'm taking my cues from
Yeah.
you. You're like doing all interesting things like 7 parts 2. It's like, I need to be more creative. Taylor's really
I love it.
pushing the envelope here. Okay, so if you're ready, we're going to go ahead and draw the curtain on Act 1. So
Okay.
I'm going to start today's story by covering one of the most shameful parts of American history, and one that is much less well known than its crimson counterpart, the Lavender Scare. Do you know what this is?
Okay. No. It's about gays.
Yes, but you can say it differently. Yes, it is.
I apologize. Cut that out.
No.
No, I don't know. Tell me.
Okay, we're gonna get into
Go ahead.
it. So I will say also,
ready.
as Taylor has mentioned in the past, like we are not queer historians. I am
Right.
sure that I'm gonna leave stuff out, and that someone much smarter than me could do a better job and a more comprehensive job of covering today's topic. But I went down a rabbit hole and got too far before realizing I really just didn't have enough time to pick a different topic. So here we are, and we're just gonna move forward. So, as most people are aware, and Oppenheimer, the movie, basically bored everybody to death about, the Red Scare was a period of American history where accusations of being a communist or having communist sympathies basically resulted in people losing their livelihoods and their careers and reputations in American U.S. government agencies. The same thing ended up happening with the House Un-American Committee, which was the equivalent but for the entertainment industry. But what we're focusing on is the government agency side of things today. What is less known is that in parallel to the Red Scare was the Lavender Scare, which was the name attributed to the same kind of marginalizing and abuse that went into outing purported homosexuals from government agencies. So this story reminded me, which I shouldn't probably need a reminder of this, but it did remind me of how important institutions are and kind of driving the public zeitgeist. So Stonewall, the uprising, didn't happen until almost 1970. The Lavender Scare started in 1947 and kind of set the national mood for how people would think of and treat homosexuals, basically. The genesis of setting that mood was the State Department setting security protocols for the types of people who were ill-suited to serving the U.S. government, and the criteria for that protocol was, and this is a quote, communists, their associates, those guilty of espionage, persons known for habitual drunkenness, sexual perversion, moral turpitude, financial responsibility, or criminal records. So the key there was the term sexual perversion. And I did a little side quest here and started digging into the DSM. The DSM is the acronym that stands for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, which is basically the book of all psychological disorders, essentially. So I went as far back as the DSM-1, which is the very first edition of the DSM, and that was published a little bit after this time. So the Lavender Scare started around 1947. The DSM-1 was published in 1952. Before then, it was actually worse definition-wise. There was another diagnostic book on this, but the DSM was the first time they kind of codified it. In the DSM, homosexuality was listed and categorized under sexual deviations on the same level as pedophilia. Like that's what it was considered at the time. And that was the term being used for it, was sexual perversion. So when the State Department includes that term, that's what they're talking about specifically. So it was only in 1974, with the publication of the DSM-2 and the organizing effort of gay rights activists, the medical community finally decided to consider homosexuality as a slightly better thing, which was then known as a sexual orientation disturbance, which still sounds awful. It was still considered a mental disorder, but it was still better than the other classification of the DSM-1. It's also worth noting that as of today, which we are now at the DSM-5, there is literally no category for homosexuality. Like it's not considered a mental disorder, obviously. And so, yeah, progress. We made it somehow. So, are you following?
Yes, that is super interesting, and it's so weird to like write. Why would you write that down?
Which one?
You know, like the whole thing. Like, why would you have to write down like that it's a disorder? It's just weird to me.
Yeah, well, so that was basically the medical consensus for all of time. It's funny, I went into this, took me down so many different sidetracks. The entire gay rights movement started in like Germany in the 1880s because like that was the first time
Hmm.
anybody tried to stand up for the cause, and
Hmm.
it's always been considered like some sort of a mental like defect. It's only as of like the late 1990s or so that it started becoming mostly accepted in society. But even then, it wasn't like great. So yeah, it was a wild turn of events. It sounds like the 1940s and 50s and 60s were incredibly difficult. But luckily, the
Yeah.
medical community made the change, made the switch. Um, so the point being that the medical community itself classified homosexuality in this way, which of course is how the federal government followed as well. Also, I want to
Hmm.
note that I'm only referring to the time period in this story known as the Lavender Scare because that was the most aggressive and overt attempt by the federal government to otherize people. It's not like the time before this
Hmm.
was any better, but it just wasn't like it wasn't like a national thing. It wasn't like it's like
Right.
when 9/11 happened and like the entire country is just focused on that thing. That's what was going on here.
Hmm.
And so before that, it was like,
Hmm.
okay, you run into a thing, something happens, you get caught for some like I forgot what the term was they used, but you got caught for like lascivious, whatever, contact or
Hmm.
lewd behavior, and it's like, okay, Bill over there got caught for something, whatever. A year or two, he's over it, and we're moving on with our lives. But this was different. This was like
Hmm.
the entire nation's kind of staring at this one topic, which made it a lot worse because it's not like being outed just meant that it wasn't a quiet thing. It meant you lost your livelihood.
Right.
It means you lost your career, your future, your social network, your family. Like it was everything was gone. It was a
Hmm.
huge deal.
Hmm. Hmm.
So in 1950, as Joseph McCarthy was picking up steam in his prosecution of purported communists, the Undersecretary of State, a guy whose name I will have a hard time pronouncing, called John Purifoy, announced that the State Department had rooted out and fired about 91 gay people. The government consensus was that one, that is a shockingly large number, and two, it means President Truman was not taking this threat seriously. Part of this was driven by the fervor McCarthy himself was spinning up because it was seen as being weak or immoral to not be outraged that gay people were in the government. And if you weren't
Right.
being super aggressive and aggro about it, then you were you were part of the problem.
And you're gay.
So yeah, exactly.
Oh, but
So
that's so stupid. Yeah,
so
continue.
a part of it was like just self-preservation of like this cowardice of being like, I'd better call
Yeah,
Steve out because if I don't call Steve out, Steve might call me out.
right. Totally.
And it was funny,
And of
like,
course, there's tons of gay people in the government because
of
there's
course,
always
like,
been gay people. We talked about this a lot.
of course, go to DC. Like, it's a great city. Like, it's a fun city. Like, yeah. But also the other part was like what people would do at this time was they would introduce themselves and say things like, "Hi, I'm Steve. I've been married to Julie for 5 years. We have 6 children." You know what I mean? Like, they would like be over the top. Like,
Right. It's like a part of who you are.
they would put that part of their identity first and foremost because that's how scared people were of like that. Because you didn't have to act. By the way, we don't know if these people were actually gay. like
Right. And exactly. That's not the point either.
that's not
Yeah.
the point at all. Yeah, exactly. So
Hmm.
in 1953, Truman's second term was done. he did not aggressively pursue this. Like he was just like, this is crazy. Like he wasn't in that headspace. He actually could have run for a third time because he was grandfathered in as an incumbent
Hmm.
president, but he decided against it, and Eisenhower became president. One of the first things he does as president is sign Executive Order 10450, which happened only 2 months after assuming office. This executive order made it illegal to hire or allow the employment of gay federal workers. 5,000 such workers were fired for suspicion of homosexuality. And they, again, like they weren't just being fired, they were being publicly outed. Like there was a roster people could look
Yeah.
at. And
Wow.
yeah,
Eisenhower. He also put "In God We Trust" on everything.
so
Um,
here's the thing. Here's the thing about Eisenhower that if you go deeper into this executive order and his relation with McCarthy and McCarthyism, is that he was also under this, like when the election happened, the 52 election happened, a part of the fervor in America was this anti-communist, anti-gay sentiment.
mhm,
And part of the reason why Eisenhower ended up winning was because Republicans were seen to be stronger on this topic than Democrats, and the public zeitgeist
mhm.
was going towards that. And so I'll get to this later on. Well, actually, I won't get to it later on because I didn't write it down. But eventually, when McCarthyism kind of wanes and goes away, it was obvious at
Mhm.
that time that Eisenhower was like, "Great, fuck this guy. I never want to be this way, anyways. Like, I'm done with this
Yeah.
bullshit." Like, it was like,
I
sure, like he probably wasn't great, but it seems like he did this as also part of like self-preservation.
I agree. And I mean, I think the God stuff fucked us up because people think that that was always there. Um, but I do like him. I do like the way he ended his presidency, with the
Yeah,
military
yeah,
industrial complex. Like everyone calm the fuck down. And then I like that he was a general, and I like that in the book I read a biography about him, and in that biography, um specifically about McCarthy, I'm remembering that he kind of let McCarthy like do his stuff on TV because he was like, this guy's fucking crazy. Everyone's gonna see it. And they kind of did, and it was kind of embarrassing for McCarthy,
yeah.
which was like
Exactly, exactly.
part of his plan.
There's
Yeah.
also something I learned in the middle of all this that has to do with the term called presentism, which is the sentiment that you see now a lot, which is like if you didn't think the way a modern person would think today about social issues, then you're the problem like 1,000 years ago, which is like an
Right.
unfair perspective to take. And it really came in perspective when I was researching this because you want to think that like marginalized communities have each other's backs in some ways. And one thing I learned was like that is 1,000% was not the case in the gay community. Like
Hmm.
there was gradients to this. Like there was the white male gays, and then there was like the
Of
socioeconomic
course.
ladder of gays. There was like the minorities. There was the
Yeah.
transgenders. There was one guy who became like a huge figure, one of the first people to get fired from the he's an astronomer working for the army. He ended up getting fired. He ended up never working again because of the Lavender Scare. But you read like his comments about race in the 1960s, and you're like,
Right.
uh, you're like, man, I want to support you. Like I do support like that you got
Why are you doing
railroaded, but
this?
like, why are you going that direction with this? Like, there's no like,
Gross. Yes.
and so, anyways, that led me down a different rabbit hole. But presentism, like, look into it. Like, it is generally shitty to like judge people in the past for like what current social mores are, but it's
Hmm.
also it can be gross the way it was gross when I was reading this guy talking about race. Anyways,
Yeah.
sidetrack. Um,
No, 100%. I know what you're saying.
so yeah, so okay, so this executive order gets passed, and just to remind people of how recent this history is that we're talking about, the Eisenhower executive order that made it illegal to hire or retain somebody gay in the federal government or federal agency, that was partially rescinded when Bill Clinton signed his "Don't Ask, Don't Tell" policy for the U.S. military in
Hmm.
1995. But that was only for the U.S. military. That was not for
I can't
civilian.
believe how recent that was and how shitty it was.
Yeah. So it was interesting because I read this other footnotes, which was like this is a hilarious side thing that ended up happening because of Eisenhower, which was when the Vietnam draft happened, all these people came out and saying that they're gay when they got drafted. So like, fuck this, I'm not
I
going to
love that.
Vietnam. Um, And then it would be in the last 3 days of the Obama presidency in 2017 that Executive Order 13988 would be signed to outright prevent discrimination in the civilian or the military branch of the U.S. government on the basis of sexual orientation. That
Wow.
was 2017. That was January 17th, 2017, 3 days before Trump took presidency. Crazy. So the
Mm-hmm.
persecution of homosexuals in state and federal government agencies continued on throughout the 1990s. Again, like it was only in 2017 when the federal government actually apologized for the damage it caused in this era. But all that being said, I'm going to leave the Lavender Scare here for a beat so we can head into Act 2 of the story today, called The Resistance. You ready?
All right. Yeah, I'm ready.
So I don't know, Taylor. I think like given our backgrounds, like our work history and stuff, like I think we both have like a pretty good understanding of like the power of organizing, and
Mm-hmm.
that's where this story kind of starts with the gay rights movement. So I'm gonna touch on what movement building typically looks like, and you'll see how it plays out in this situation. There's no set way to build a movement, but in broad strokes, it requires four things as defined by an organization I found called JAS, which is short for Just Associates, which is a grassroots movement building advocacy organization that's focused towards female empowerment. And they put together this framework, which if you were to look this up, there's like 20 different frameworks for this. Like there is no set way of doing this, but generally speaking, this breakdown made the most sense to me, given like again like our background in movements and organizing and stuff like that. The four pieces of it were number one, rising up, which is finding like-minded individuals. Number two, building up, which is what we would consider traditional organizing, sharing your message and spreading it to mobilize others. The third is
Mm-hmm.
standing up, which is direct action or something close to it. You know, some people don't have to go all the way to direct action, but they could. And the fourth is shaking up, which is combating that thing you're fighting for with policy. So now that we have that framework, I'm going to bring up my second favorite podcast ever, which is called You're Wrong About, because I'm going to be
Mm-hmm.
parroting part of what the host commentary on the gay rights movement was as it related to their episode on the Stonewall riots. Again, I'm just going off, like, I'm not in this community. Like, I'm going off of what I'm hearing from others that are in the community say. So, like, your beef was with them if you don't like where I'm going with this. But
Yeah,
unlike, I know, nice disclaimer, right? Unlike
I like it.
other diaspora in the US, gayness isn't limited to race, religion, education, socioeconomic status, geography. It's not limited to anything really. It's just this one unique characteristic that anybody can share with others, right?
Mm-hmm.
In that sense, the fact that the gay rights movement was able to form the resistance that we're going to be discussing here is actually super impressive because how do you bring together, for example, and this is like directly from like I'm parroting the host from You're Wrong About, Michael Hobbs. How do you bring together, let's say, like a 35-year-old gay Manhattan lawyer making like 300,000 a year, living in a penthouse, and a 20-year-old like gay street punk who's living in the subway stations, right? Like the only
Mm-hmm.
thread between them is sexual orientation, really. Their lived
Mm-hmm.
experiences are vastly different, and so there's not like obvious places where like those things collide. Like I would argue that
Mm-hmm.
okay, let's say like it's the 1960s and you're like a black like accountant versus like it's the 1960s and you're like a black I don't know like a store clerk or something. Like your lived experience is going to still look very similar. Like the day to day when you go to the grocery store, it's
Mm-hmm.
going to look very similar. It's going to look very similar to like talk to certain police or whatever. But these two, this part of the diaspora is like vastly different than that, and so it makes it super challenging on the first two part of movement building, which is rising and building up together, to kind of put those pieces together essentially. So
Mm-hmm.
one group that initially took the plunge and started what would have been basically career in social suicide was this organization called the Madison Society. Have you heard of this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-mm.
Okay, so the
No.
history and origin of the Madison Society is kind of all over the place, and some of it is kind of problematic, mostly because it really coincidentally, not deliberately, it happened to tie communism and homosexuality together because of the origins of its founder and the original members. And
Hmm.
it went through like a huge upheaval because then the Lavender Scare happened and the Red Scare happened. Like, guys, we can't be tied to this. Like, it's bad enough. Like, we don't need communism as part of
Right.
the mix, right? And so, anyways, there's a lot of
Hmm.
upheaval there, and so the main the main thing that the National Society basically did was it created the opportunity for gay people to kind of come together in mostly an anonymous way and just kind of discuss their
Hmm.
lived experiences. But the more critical part in this was that it kind of spun off into its own thing. It turned into a non-centralized movement where every city would have its own management society. And all of a sudden,
Hmm.
it started the rising up part of movement building started to kind of realize itself. The third step, so sorry, the rising up part was basically the initial knowing that you could come together, and then as it's distributing across, then it's building up. That's actual traditional organizing. The third step, the standing up
Hmm.
part, came in the biggest way in 1969 with the riot at the Stonewall Inn. Obviously, I'm sure
Hmm.
you've probably been to Stonewall Inn, right?
I haven't. No,
Okay, well,
but
figured
I
given you're a New
know, I
Yorker.
know, I know where it is.
Cool. Yeah, yeah. So the Stonewall Inn was at the time kind of like a hidden gay club, which was run by the mafia in New York. By all accounts, it was a
Hmm.
complete shithole, but it was like super fun. It was the one place gay people around the Greenwich Village area could kind of come together for a night on the town. And because running, a gay establishment was illegal at the time, everything was kind of done underground. And because of this, the mafia saw an opening and took it upon themselves to open the Stonewall Inn. Obviously, they did not
That's
hold their
interesting.
patrons in the highest, you know,
Right.
esteem.
They
And
were like,
so,
whatever.
yeah, like,
That's so funny.
go ahead, sorry.
Um, I was in, I was in Charlotte, North Carolina, and there was like a Stonewall Street, and I was like, wow, that's so progressive. And then I was like, oh no, they mean Stonewall
Stonewall Jackson.
Jackson.
Yeah, yeah, different, different.
Right. And he was
Uh,
killed by friendly fire, BT dubs. That was just like, I was like, right.
yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know why
Okay,
why
cool.
they, I actually didn't research why they called it the Stonewall Inn, but
I
stories I
think it's
heard.
literally by like a stone wall of like old New York or something. I don't know, that might not be true, but I think it's something like that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, of course, because Stonewall is its own word, right? And like Stonewall Jackson was named that because he was like an immovable object. Okay, yeah, it makes sense. His name wasn't
Hmm.
Stonewall. Okay. Um, so yeah, I've read stories about this,
Which
about
that's
how
a good, but put that on your list for your future children. Stonewall
Stonewall.
in like a just a Stonewall way, like not referencing anything. Like, no, this kid's tough.
I know
This
it's
tough
it could
ass
go, it could
kid.
go either direction though. You're kind of pigeonholing your child into super masculinity or not, but um,
Maybe.
so yeah, like again, like this was run by the mafia, and so as a result of that, one thing I read was like there was no like running water, and so people just like piss in buckets and they would throw like it was not a well-run facility. It was all underground bullshit, right? And so
Hmm.
the additional layer to this was that there was basically like a tacit understanding between the Stonewall, its patrons, and the police, where police would regularly raid it, and they would usually
Hmm.
raid it earlier in the night, like call like 9, 10 o'clock when it wasn't super packed, it wasn't super busy. They would, put a padlock on the door, kick everybody out. They would steal the cigar box that contained, like, that was basically their makeshift register full of money
Of
and be like,
course.
well, that's your punishment. They probably take one or two people that work there and say, we got to throw you in jail. But it was like this understanding, like, okay, like this is our one haven, but we're gonna get fucked with every now and then, right?
Right.
That kind of changed on June 28th of 1969 because they decided to break into this place and shut it down at 1:20 a.m. So people were like, they thought they were safe, they were having a good time. Police
Right.
show
It was
up
past that time.
way past that time. Basically my understanding of it is that the police broke this tacit understanding between the patrons of Stonewall and the morals police of in New York. And
Hmm.
so people were upset. And as they were getting upset, one woman, which I'm not going to refer to her what they refer to her. Like, she has a name that would be probably like a derogatory term now, and so I'm not going to refer to her as that. But she ends up getting arrested, and they're doing it pretty aggressively, and she ends up fighting back
Hmm.
against the police. And so as she was fighting back against the police, people saw they're like, oh wait, we can fight back against them. By all accounts, it was somewhere around like
Hmm.
500 or so people had gathered outside the Stonewall Inn when this was going on. Maybe like a tenth of the number of cops. And they're like, oh, we outnumber these people dramatically. Let's go ahead and do something. And so at
Yeah.
that point, all hell kind of breaks loose. And one of the details I loved about this was that the police calling the SWAT team, and like there's like a conga line forming where they would like throw rocks at like the police and they'd run behind them and through the alleyway and then do like a conga line and making fun of them and then run back around and throw rocks. It was just mayhem. It was absolute mayhem. But I will say, to the
Yeah.
credit of the chief of police at the time, he did tell his men to like not use deadly force, which is restraint that I don't even know police would have today, much less back then.
100% no. Yeah,
So,
that's great.
so this riot is basically considered the birth of the gay pride movement. It was
Hmm.
the flip from let's be in secret so nobody knows who we are to how the way we're being treated is bullshit to fuck you, we're not taking this anymore. Like it follows the pattern of movement building in like a long
Hmm.
tail way from the days of the 1940s, the Madison Society, to like that distribution of the Madison Society across different cities, to let's have these local haunts, to let's rebel, let's fight back, because at this
Hmm.
time, again, it was illegal to even have these establishments. Like it was
Hmm.
completely criminalized, and so this was a
Hmm.
very overt way to kind of fight back against that. The riot was the genesis of the actual first super public gay rights organization. Like literally, it was like right after the Stonewall riot this happened. It was called the Gay Liberation Front. They're closer to like a
Hmm.
direct action organization as opposed to what Madison Society really was, which is like let's just like know that we have camaraderie amongst each other. They
Wait, wait,
took
say that
the
again. You cut off. You cut out a little bit. Say that
Oh,
again.
sorry. So they were more of a direct action organization as opposed to Madison Society, which was more of a let's just get together and talk about things and know that we have
Hmm.
a safe space with each other. So, I mean, really, one thing I read was that the Gay Liberation Front thought that Madison Society was just like an old timer thing and was like these guys are way too chill about this, and we need to get out there and crack heads.
Hmm.
They also did something fun, which was they formed like internal caucuses. So, for example, like the lesbian members would have their caucus, the trans members would have theirs, the drag queens would have theirs, and they would openly protest at City Hall on street corners. They would publish periodicals on issues that were affecting the community in those individual caucuses. Like they were very out and loud about it, which was brave,
Hmm.
frankly, because everything was illegal. Like just literally existing was illegal at that point. So
Yeah.
good for them on that front. On the fourth element of movement building, the last piece of it was shaking up, and that had to do with implementing policy. So today, there are 11 openly gay members of the U.S. House, and sorry, yeah, of the U.S. House, and two in the U.S. Senate. So by percentage, the Pew Research Foundation found that 7.4% of Americans identify as LGBT. By
Hmm.
comparison, the makeup of Congress is 2.4% between the House and the Senate combined. And so, it's not quite direct representation, but like that is huge. Like from like
It's huge.
from like being like
From like, I mean, and
illegal.
also like, hmm
Go ahead, sorry.
no, I was gonna say also just like being able to say it out loud. I'm sure there were gay members of Congress
And I'm
in the
sure there's
50s.
more. I'm
You
sure there's
know,
more. There's got to be
yeah.
way more closeted ones out there. But I'm saying like in 2017 is the first time there was an actual repeal of the law that Eisenhower, that was 2017. And
That's
I mean,
bananas.
it's wild to think about. But with that said, we can actually pivot now to Act Three, which is the doomed to fail part of all this.
Amazing.
So
Amazing. You
the
did so much work for
principal.
this. I'm so proud of you.
Aw, thank you. It
This
was
is so
once you
well researched. Keep going.
once you start going down it, it's just like, oh my God. Like, it's interesting because it's almost like a diorama of like a movement. Like you look at like, uh, black right organizations or racial equality movements and stuff like that. There's history that goes backwards like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And there's so many different
Hmm.
like milestones, and it's so slow in terms of how it happened. The fact that this went from like something that we kind of know what's going on, but we're not really going to look at, to we're gonna
Mm-hmm.
prosecute to we're gonna revolt. It's like 15 years. You can actually get like a beautiful picture of like what a movement should look like just looking at like the
Mm-hmm.
gay rights movement because it happened within a very
Mm-hmm.
finite window of time and it happened dramatically.
I mean,
So
and in the middle of it, you have HIV because that was huge. And
yeah, yeah,
they had to do
yeah,
so much. I mean, there's still so much that like didn't happen in the 80s that should have happened that is terrible, you know? But they
totally,
were like primed to be able to help each other um because yeah, they were
totally.
like at least able to talk about it. Yeah.
At least, but that's the thing. At least they were able to have a community that they could rely on each other. Like
Hmm.
again, going back to the Management Society concept, there's so many other ones. There's the women of Bilitis, the girls of Bilitis, which is like the lesbian version of that. There's like this. We could have done like 17 weeks on this, but like I'm giving you the highlights
Yeah.
here. But okay, so Act Three, the Doom to Fall Apart. So the principal architects of the Red and Lavender Scare were two complete and utter pieces of shit named Joseph McCarthy and his chief counsel Roy Cohn. Spoiler alert: Roy
Assholes.
was gay.
Of
Even
course he
while,
was.
of course, he was. Even as he was actively
Fucking
outing
yeah.
and publicly having people fired for these allegations, people even then assumed he was gay. Like there was one
We
moment
see
during
that
it.
now. All we see that now. That still happens. You
Yeah,
know?
the
We
the
like
lady
find
duck
a politician on
protest.
Grinder.
Larry
Yeah,
Craig. Remember Larry Craig?
exactly. Yes, exactly.
There you go. So there was a moment during a hearing of the Lavender Scare where someone he was questioning basically called him a fairy. Not basically, he called him a fairy. and and Roy never actually admitted to being gay, but it was like pretty well known. So one of his assistants, his name was Russell Eldridge, who was gay. And then he died of
What?
AIDS. Yeah. And then he also had a partner who he lived
That
with
is
who also died of AIDS in 1986. And then Roy himself died of AIDS. And like it was known. It was just like it was like Rock Hudson. You couldn't say it, but it was like there. It was out there, right? Um,
ugh,
it's also worth noting, like the reason Roy's such a piece of shit is he was also like Donald Trump's main attorney when he was basically evicting a bunch of minorities out of like public housing so he could buy property and turn it into luxury condos. So there's that as
wow, what a
well.
piece of shit.
And he
Yeah.
also defended John Gotti and basically, I think it was like two other mafia bosses in New York. Like he was a huge.
No re no redeeming qualities, that guy.
Before he
What an
died,
asshole.
he was formally disbarred. Like he literally legally could not practice law anymore. So that was his contribution to society. As for Roy's boss, Justin McCarthy, again, huge piece of shit. There was also speculation that he was gay, and this one's a bit harder to verify. So Joseph was married; he did have a kid, but there was rumors that were spread around Washington of like him frequenting a gay bar in Milwaukee. He was a senator from Wisconsin, and so Milwaukee. There was rumors that he was there. There's rumors that somebody said that he tried to pick him up and do all that. There, some of the speculation is that these accusations were, if they weren't true, then the reason they probably came out was because J. Edgar Hoover, who ran the FBI, and Alan Dulles, who ran the CIA, fucking hated him. They thought he was a total piece of
Hmm.
shit, and so they were like,
Hmm.
"Yeah, let's just like put all these rumors out there. Let's find people to say this shit and try to like soil his reputation that way." It didn't really work in the end, but there is some assumption that that was what was going on. The Red and Lavender Scare and McCarthyism and his reputation all kind of came to an end when he held a hearing into the armed forces and how some 130 alleged communists were employed there. One thing to note, and I didn't write this down, is that Roy Cohn, part of the other allegation about him being gay is that there was this guy whose name I can't remember, but he was with the army, and Roy Cohn hired him to work in McCarthy's office. And Roy was apparently like completely in love with this dude. And
Hmm.
the army took him and sent him overseas. And Roy would constantly have these back and forths with the army around how he should be treated, how he should have better, um, place to sleep and food. Like he should be treated a certain way and if he wasn't, that he was
Hmm.
gonna like try and burn the entire army down to the ground. That's what led to this hearing. It was literally the fact that Roy wasn't getting the guy he was like in love with, the kind of treatment he thought he deserved, and the army wasn't acquiescing to him because they're not fucking scared of him. They're like, "Fuck you, we're not gonna do what you want." So then they drag the army into a hearing on communists, and that's what fundamentally destroys Roy Cohn and McCarthy's reputation. So I'm going to tell you what happened. So they drag the chief counsel for the army into this special hearing. The guy's name is Joseph Nye Welsh, and they basically say there's 130 people who are communists in the army. At one point, so Joseph is he's chief counsel for the army, so he also runs a law firm as well. And there was a
Hmm.
individual named Fred something, again, didn't write this down, but he was apparently a part of this thing called the Lawyers Guild of America, which again, you don't need a
Hmm.
lot of information to know that like any association of people was assumed to be like some sort of a communist thing. And so because of his association
Right.
with this guild, which was basically an association of other lawyers, on national
Hmm.
TV, McCarthy accused this guy Fred, who was like a junior associate at Welsh's law firm, of being a communist. And Welsh lost it. Welsh like fuck this guy, and that's what we
Yeah.
all remember is the famous saying. He goes, "This is a quote." He goes, "Have you no sense of decency, sir? At long last, have you left no sense of decency?" But there was a build up to that. Like he was cutting McCarthy down over and over and over again, and then he kept
Hmm.
bringing up this guy Fred's association with this guild. And what Welsh was saying was like, you have no information. You're trying to out my junior associate, who is like a Harvard
Yeah,
law
like
grad, as a communist in front of the
calm down.
entire country.
Yeah.
Like fuck you. You have no right to do that. And so, and that was basically the moment. That was like the pivotal turn when Welsh said that. That kind of changed the public perception. This is on national television. Apparently, the entire I didn't see the video, but the entire audience in the hearing chamber started applauding Welsh, and it was right after that that the U.S. Senate decided to censure McCarthy, back when censuring a senator was actually kind of a big deal, and
Hmm.
it was their way of saying that you brought ill repute upon the U.S. Senate. He would basically die a few years later at the age of 48 from what is now like it was referred to as like a way of committing suicide because apparently he just fucking was drunk constantly. He just drank himself to death. Now it is considered that he died.
McCarthy did?
Yeah, it is now considered that he died of cirrhosis of the liver. But people will say that like from this day when Welsh called him out until his death, like he basically just lived with a bottle. Like it was almost a way of committing suicide. So
What wow, he's only 48.
yeah,
I feel like
yeah, it's 48.
that's a lot.
He did a
He could
lot
have
of
had
bad
another
things.
another 40 years in the Senate if he had wanted.
Yeah, he did a lot of bad shit to
Spry.
deserve it though.
Wow.
So that is my three-act story of
That's so interesting.
it really is like once you start like
And it's not over, like it's still like there's, all you can't teach diversity, equity, and inclusion in colleges in Texas and Florida anymore, like it's not
yeah,
gone.
yeah,
It's
there's the history is gonna again you got to look at things within a framework of like what it meant for for being alive to be for like living your life to be illegal
yeah,
to 30 years later, like it's just crazy. It was
wild. Yeah.
74. It was 74 until laws started being repealed at the federal level on outlawing and making criminal like gay behavior. Um, that's not that long ago. That's
No,
not
not
that
at
long
all.
ago. And
And there's always
so,
been gay people. So like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And so I don't know. I mean, Taylor, you're about to catch a flight. Like you should. It's worth listening to that you're wrong about episode about Stonewall. I thought that because that's what I
Hmm.
listened to when I was like, man, that was 1969. Like that a lot of shit, a lot of good shit
Hmm.
happened between like like between such a like a not that long period of time. And so I don't know if it's up your alley, if it's a topic you're interested in, then I definitely recommend You're Wrong About's episode on Stonewall, because they cover it very
Hmm.
very comprehensively.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Super,
um,
super interesting.
anyway, so I know you got to run. You got to get to the airport. Go do your thing. I will text you later with ideas on where to go. What time are you thinking? Maybe 7 or 8?
Yeah, let's try 8 because I'm gonna land at like 5:45.
Okay. Yeah, you need some time to rest.
And
Okay.
then well, until I get there. Also, oh, I have one more listener mail.
Yes.
Um, we have a friend on Instagram named September, which is a dope name, and she's been sending me like stories of like, like that woman who wrote a book that was like how to kill your husband, and then she killed her husband. Do you remember that?
Yes. Yes.
And then there was like the other woman who like killed her husband and she was like wrote a book about like grieving. And you're like, what? And then there's another one recently where I don't know what it was, but some judge show, not Judge Judy, but a different one. There was a guy who was like talking about being married, and then he was like talking to the security guard, and the security guard was like, trying to be very like very serious. And he's like, "Oh, that guy looks married," and they're like, "He's married, but he's very
Oh,
happy," and everyone
yeah,
laughed,
yeah, yeah.
like,
And he
but and then he,
kills.
and then he killed his wife.
Yep, I remember that one. That was a good one.
Anyway. Anyway, don't say on TV that you love your wife because you might kill her.
Yeah, it's
And
uniformly true. Never, never
yeah.
publicly discuss things like that.
Awesome. Well, that thank you, Farz. We're at Doomed to Fail Pod at Gmail, on Instagram, on YouTube and TikTok, and literally everywhere. We also have a Substack where you can sign up for our emails if that's an easier way for you to see what we're doing each week. We'd love you to do that as well. And please share it with your friends because we need to share it. And I don't know how to do that.
We need to be famous. We need to get famous. You guys can help us. Awesome. Thanks, Sarah. Looking
Yes.
forward to seeing you later. Have a safe trip.
Thanks. Thanks.
Right.
Are you
Bye,
gonna
all.
cut it off or we can say goodbye?
Yes.
Faces. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
We'll do faces.
Cool.